The Galactic Council chambers hummed with tension as representatives from 12 different species gathered around the crystalline conference table. Ambassador Zexhai of the Vorthan Empire drummed his six-clawed fingers against the surface, his reptilian eyes fixed on the human delegation across from him. The war between humanity and the Vorthans had raged for 3 brutal years, consuming entire star systems and leaving billions dead on both sides. "This is madness," hissed General Croth, his battle-scarred carapace gleaming under the artificial lights. "We should crush these mammals beneath our claws, not negotiate with them." Zexhai raised a scaled hand for silence. The Vorthan Empire had ruled this sector of the galaxy for over 2 millennia, their superior technology and warrior culture making them nearly unstoppable. But humanity had proven surprisingly resilient, their adaptability and tactical innovation turning what should have been a quick conquest into a grinding stalemate. On the human side of the table, Admiral Sarah Chun maintained her composure despite the obvious hostility radiating from their former enemies. She had lost too many good people in this war, watched too many colonies burn under Vorthan plasma bombardments. But she also understood the bigger picture that few others could see. "The hegemony approaches from the outer rim," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the murmured conversations. "Our intelligence suggests they'll reach this sector within 2 standard years. Neither of our civilizations can face them alone." The mention of the hegemony sent a chill through the assembled delegates. The ancient machine intelligence had already consumed 3 entire galactic arms, converting all organic life into raw materials for their endless expansion. World after world fell silent as the geometric ships swept through star systems like a plague of metal locusts. "You propose an alliance," Zexhai said, his tone carefully neutral. "But trust between our peoples has been shattered. Too much blood has been spilled." Admiral Chen nodded slowly. "Which is why we propose something more binding than mere treaties. A marriage alliance, as our ancestors once practiced. A union that would create unbreakable bonds between our civilizations." The Vorthan delegation erupted in angry chittering and hissing. General Croth slammed his massive fist on the table, cracking the crystal surface. "You insult us. No pure-blooded Vorthan would contaminate themselves with human genetics." "Not just any marriage," Chun continued calmly. "A marriage between champions. Your greatest warrior and ours." Zexhai's eyes narrowed to golden slits. "And who would represent humanity in such a union?" Chun gestured to the figure seated beside her, a man who had remained silent throughout the proceedings. Captain Marcus Rivera looked unremarkable by human standards. Average height, brown hair, quiet demeanor. But those who knew his reputation understood that appearances could be devastatingly deceiving. "Captain Rivera has agreed to represent humanity's interests," Chen announced. General Croft laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "This soft creature? Our champion would tear him apart in seconds." "Your champion being?" Rivera asked quietly, speaking for the first time. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but something in his tone made several Vorthan warriors shift uncomfortably. "Princess Veltar," Zexhai replied with obvious pride. "Daughter of Emperor Vexthal, conqueror of the Andorian Nebula, slayer of the great beast of Proxima. She has never known defeat in single combat." Rivera nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And this marriage would be contingent on a formal challenge." "Of course," General Croft snarled. "If you cannot defeat our princess in honorable combat, you are unworthy to share her bed or command our respect." The human captain smiled slightly, an expression that somehow made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. "When do we begin?" As the formal arrangements were discussed, none of the aliens present truly understood what they had just agreed to. They knew Marcus Rivera's military record, of course, impressive by human standards, decorated veteran of the Vorthan campaigns. But they had no idea about the classified missions, the impossible victories against overwhelming odds, or why his own species sometimes whispered his name with the same reverence reserved for legends. Princess Veltar herself remained on the Vorthan homeworld, preparing for what her advisors assured her would be a brief and decisive combat against an inferior opponent. She had fought the humans before, knew their limitations. They were clever, certainly, but physically weak and slow compared to Vorthan warriors. What neither side fully grasped was that this marriage proposal would either forge the greatest alliance in galactic history or spark a conflict that would make their previous war seem like a minor skirmish. The fate of two civilizations now rested on the outcome of a single combat between champions who had never met but whose destinies were now irrevocably intertwined. The arena on Vorthan Prime stretched across several acres of polished black stone, its walls rising 300 feet toward the crimson sky. Thousands of Vorthan spectators filled the tiered seating, their scales glittering like living armor in the alien sunlight. This was more than just a combat trial. It was a spectacle that would determine the future relationship between two species. Princess Veltar stood at the arena's center, her 8-foot frame imposing even by Vorthan standards. Ceremonial bone plates adorned her natural armor, and twin plasma blades hummed at her sides. Her golden eyes surveyed the crowd with predatory satisfaction. She had trained for this moment since childhood, mastering every form of combat known to her people. Marcus Rivera entered through the opposite gate, and a murmur of disbelief rippled through the assembled Vorthans. He looked even smaller in the vast arena, wearing simple human military fatigues and carrying what appeared to be an ancient projectile weapon, a relic from Earth's primitive past. No armor, no energy shields, no advanced technology. Is this some kind of insult? Princess Veltar called out, her voice amplified across the arena. They sent me a museum piece to fight with toys? Rivera checked his rifle's magazine with practiced efficiency, then looked up at her with those unsettling calm eyes. I apologize if my equipment seems inadequate, Your Highness. I prefer to keep things simple. Emperor Vexthul watched from his elevated platform, his ancient features carved from living stone. Beside him, Admiral Chun maintained her diplomatic composure despite the obvious mismatch. The human delegation seemed confident, but the Emperor could not fathom why. Perhaps they simply accepted that their representative would die honorably. The terms are simple, the arena master announced in booming tones. Single combat to yield or death. No outside interference. Victory determines the validity of the marriage alliance. Princess Veltar activated her plasma blades, twin columns of superheated energy that could slice through starship hull plating. The crowd roared approval as she began her approach, moving with liquid grace despite her size. Vorthan combat doctrine emphasized overwhelming aggression. Close distance quickly used superior strength and speed to dominate the opponent. Rivera remained perfectly still until she had closed to within 50 yards. Then he moved. The first shot took her left plasma blade, the projectile somehow disrupting the energy matrix and causing the weapon to explode in her grip. The second shot, fired before the sound of the first had reached the spectators, shattered her right knee guard and sent her stumbling. The third punched through her shoulder armor, spinning her around and drawing the first blood of the combat. The crowd fell silent, stunned by the impossible accuracy and speed of the human's primitive weapon. Princess Veltar snarled in pain and rage, drawing her backup weapons, curved energy blades designed for close combat. She charged forward, ignoring the pain in her damaged leg. Rivera's next 3 shots removed each of her remaining weapons with surgical precision, the bullets somehow finding the tiny vulnerable points in their energy matrices. As she closed the final distance, he smoothly transitioned to hand-to-hand combat, flowing around her claws like water around stone. What followed was less a fight than a demonstration. Every strike the princess threw met empty air as Rivera seemed to anticipate her movements before she made them. His counterattacks were precise and economical, targeting nerve clusters and pressure points with devastating effect. Within moments, the greatest warrior of the Vorthan Empire found herself on the ground, paralyzed from the neck down, staring up at her human opponent. "Ow!" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Rivera knelt beside her, his expression genuinely sympathetic. "Your people are magnificent warriors, princess. But you've been fighting the same way for thousands of years. Humans, we adapt." He helped her to sit up, his touch gentle despite what he had just done. "The paralysis is temporary. Pressure point manipulation. You'll be fine in an hour or so." The silence in the arena stretched on until Emperor Vexthul himself rose from his throne. The ancient ruler had witnessed countless battles, but never anything like this. A human, a being his people considered barely above animals, had defeated their greatest champion with almost contemptuous ease. "The combat is concluded," the Emperor announced, his voice carrying across the stunned arena. "The marriage alliance is validated." As medical attendants rushed to assist Princess Veltar, she caught Rivera's arm with her good hand. "What are you?" she asked, golden eyes searching his face. "Riveras Maid Savli. Just a soldier, princess. Just a soldier who's learned that sometimes the only way to save lives is to be very, very good at ending them." Admiral Chun allowed herself a small smile as she watched the Vorthan leadership struggling to process what they had witnessed. They had expected a brief demonstration of their superiority. Instead, they had received their first real glimpse of why humanity had survived 3 years of war against impossible odds. The marriage ceremony would proceed as planned, but the balance of power in the negotiations had shifted dramatically. The Vorthans were beginning to understand that their new human allies might be far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The wedding ceremony took place 3 days later in the Great Temple of Vorthan Prime, its crystal spires reaching toward the stars like frozen lightning. Representatives from both species gathered in uneasy celebration, the recent combat trial having shifted everyone's expectations about this alliance. Princess Veltar, fully recovered from her injuries, wore traditional ceremonial armor, while Marcus Rivera stood beside her in dress uniform. What should have been a purely political arrangement had become something more complex. During their brief interactions since the arena, Veltar had found herself genuinely intrigued by her human husband-to-be. He treated her with respect rather than fear, discussing everything from military tactics to xenobiology with quiet intelligence. "You are not what I expected," she admitted as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Rivera adjusted his collar, clearly uncomfortable with the formal attire. "What did you expect? A barbarian, a savage. My people told me humans were little more than clever animals." She studied his profile. "But you fight like no warrior I have ever seen. Your movements were perfect. Experience has a way of teaching perfection, princess, usually through painful mistakes." The ceremony itself was a fusion of human and Vorthan traditions, symbolically binding not just 2 individuals, but 2 entire civilizations. As they exchanged vows in both languages, several Vorthan nobles looked physically ill at the prospect of their royal bloodline being contaminated with alien genetics. Emperor Vexthul, however, watched with calculating eyes. The demonstration in the arena had forced him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about humanity. If this quiet human could defeat Veltar so easily, what did that say about human military capabilities? How many others like Rivera existed in their armed forces? The celebrations lasted until the early hours of the morning, with both species attempting to find common ground through shared alcohol and increasingly boisterous storytelling. Rivera noticed how the Vorthan warriors gradually began treating him differently. Not as an equal, perhaps, but as something worthy of cautious respect. The true test of the alliance came sooner than anyone expected. 6 weeks later, Rivera and Veltar were aboard the joint patrol vessel, Harmony's Edge, when the distress signal reached them. The agricultural world of Kepler, 438b, home to 3 million Vorthan civilians, was under attack by unknown forces. The garrison had gone silent after transmitting fragmentary reports of geometric ships and mechanical armies. "It's them." Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the emergency channel. "The hegemony has arrived ahead of schedule. Kepler, 438b, is completely cut off. The nearest Vorthan battle fleet was 8 hours away, far too long to help the trapped civilians. The Human Rapid Response Force was even further out. Only the Harmony's Edge and its small crew of 50 mixed human and Vorthan personnel were close enough to make a difference. "We have to try," Veltar said grimly, studying the tactical displays. "Those are my people down there." Rivera was already moving toward the armory. "What kind of ground forces does the ship carry?" 20 Vorthan shock troopers and 15 human marines, Commander Thekral reported. "Against a hegemony invasion force, they might buy the civilians a few extra minutes to evacuate." "That's all we need," Rivera said quietly, selecting weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency. "Princess, I'll need your best warriors." Veltar watched him prepare for what appeared to be a suicide mission, noting how his entire demeanor had changed. The quiet, diplomatic husband she had been getting to know was gone, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. "Marcus, this is madness. You cannot fight an army with 35 soldiers." Rivera paused in his preparations, meeting her eyes. "Princess, there's something about human military doctrine that your intelligence files probably don't mention. We don't just fight armies. Sometimes, when the situation is desperate enough, we become armies." The assault pod launched 20 minutes later, carrying Rivera and the volunteer force toward the planet's surface. As they descended through the atmosphere, they could see the geometric perfection of hegemony architecture spreading like a virus across the landscape. Massive mining operations were already converting forests and cities into raw materials. "Landing zone is hot," the pilot reported. "Multiple hostiles converging on our position." Rivera checked his weapons one final time. The same simple rifle from the arena, along with an assortment of human explosives and close combat tools. Around him, Vorthan and human soldiers prepared for what they all assumed would be their final battle. "Remember," Rivera said over the comm system, "we're not here to win. We're here to buy time for the evacuation ships. Make every shot count, and stay alive as long as possible." As the pod touched down and its doors cycled open, the mechanical roar of hegemony forces filled the air. Hundreds of combat units were advancing across the smoking ruins of what had been a peaceful farming community. Rivera stepped into the chaos and began to work. The princess watched from orbit as tactical displays showed impossible readings. A single squad somehow holding off entire battalions of enemy forces. The humans and Vorthans were fighting with desperate courage, but at the center of it all was Rivera himself, moving through the battlefield like a force of nature. For the first time since meeting him, Veltar began to understand what her husband truly was. The battlefield had become a nightmare of twisted metal and smoke, with hegemony machines advancing in perfect geometric formations across the devastated landscape. From the orbital command center, Veltar watched the tactical display with growing disbelief as the impossible unfolded below. Rivera moved through the enemy ranks like death itself, his primitive kinetic rifle somehow finding the exact weak points in technology millennia ahead of human development. Each shot disabled or destroyed machines that should have been invulnerable to his weapons. Explosions bloomed around him as he turned the hegemony's own munitions against their forces, creating chain reactions that leveled entire formations. "How is this possible?" Commander Thekral whispered, his scaled hands trembling as he updated the casualty reports. "He's one human against 10,000 machines." The mixed squad of Vorthan and human soldiers fought with desperate courage, but they were clearly following Rivera's lead. He seemed to be everywhere at once, covering their retreats, eliminating threats before they could engage, turning defensive positions into devastating ambush points. The princess watched him catch a plasma grenade in mid-flight and redirect it into a cluster of enemy vehicles with casual precision. "Princess," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving evacuation confirmations from 12 different cities. The civilian transports are getting clear." 3 hours into the battle, Rivera had eliminated over 6,000 hegemony units using nothing but infantry weapons, and tactical brilliance. The enemy forces, designed to adapt to any opponent, seemed incapable of countering his unpredictable human strategies. Every time they adjusted their formations to counter one tactic, he shifted to something completely different. But the princess could see what the ground forces could not. Massive reinforcements moving toward Rivera's position. No matter how skilled he was, the numbers would eventually overwhelm him. "Open a channel," Veltar commanded. Rivera's voice came through clearly despite the chaos around him. "Princess, evacuation status? 80% complete. Marcus, you need to extract now. There are too many of them." A pause as another explosion lit up the tactical display. "Negative. Still have civilians in the outer settlements. We hold until everyone's clear." Veltar made a decision that would have shocked her a month ago. "All Vorthan personnel, prepare for immediate planetary assault. We're going down there." "Princess, that violates direct orders from the Emperor," Thekral protested. "We're supposed to maintain orbital observation only." "Then, I suppose I'll have to face my father's anger later." She was already moving toward the assault base. "But I will not watch my husband die alone on that planet." The Vorthan shock troops followed their princess without question, launching toward the surface in armed shuttles. As they descended, Veltar tried to process what she had witnessed over the past hours. This human she had married for political convenience was single-handedly holding off an invasion force that should have conquered the planet in minutes. The shuttle touched down in a clearing Rivera had somehow kept clear of enemy forces. As Veltar and her warriors disembarked, she found Rivera calmly reloading his rifle while sitting on the wreckage of what had been a hegemony command unit. "Princess, you shouldn't be here," he said without looking up. "This area isn't secure." She stared at him in amazement. His uniform was torn and blackened, his face streaked with smoke and alien fluids, but his hand was steady and his voice calm. Around them, the landscape was littered with the remains of enemy machines. "Marcus, what are you?" He finally looked at her, and for a moment she saw something ancient and tired in his eyes. "I'm what humans become when we have to be, when there's no choice left but to fight." Before she could respond, alerts filled their communications channels. The last civilian transport had cleared the atmosphere, but now long-range sensors were detecting the approach of a full hegemony fleet. The real invasion was about to begin. "Extraction vessels are standing by," Rivera reported to his mix squad. "Mission accomplished. Everyone to the shuttles." As they lifted off from the planet's surface, Veltar watched the hegemony fleet begin its final approach. Hundreds of geometric ships moved with mechanical precision toward the now-empty world below. They would find nothing but vacant cities and the wreckage of 6,000 destroyed machines. 3 million people, she said quietly. "You saved 3 million people." Rivera was cleaning his rifle with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. "We saved them, Princess. Your people fought just as hard as mine." But Veltar had seen the tactical recordings. Yes, her warriors had fought bravely, but Rivera had been the difference between salvation and slaughter. One human had held off an entire invasion force long enough to evacuate 3 million civilians. As they returned to the main fleet, word of the rescue spread through both human and Vorthan military channels. The political marriage was becoming something else entirely, a symbol of what these two species might accomplish together. But more importantly, the galactic community was beginning to understand what humanity truly represented. The war was far from over, but the hegemony had just learned something that would haunt their mechanical calculations for years to come. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the universe was a human who had no choice but to fight 6 months after the Battle of Kepler. 438b, the war against the hegemony had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. The alliance between humans and Vorthans had evolved far beyond political necessity into a genuine partnership forged in shared combat against impossible odds. Princess Veltar stood in the war room aboard the flagship Unity's Promise, studying holographic displays that showed the current front lines. The geometric precision of hegemony territory was slowly giving way to the chaotic, adaptive strategies that humans brought to every engagement. Beside her, Rivera coordinated with field commanders across 17 different star systems, his quiet voice directing operations that spanned light years. The transformation in her husband still amazed her. In formal settings, he remained the diplomatic, thoughtful man she had married. But when the shooting started, he became something else entirely. A tactical genius whose unconventional strategies consistently outmaneuvered opponents with superior technology and overwhelming numbers. Strike Team 7 reports successful liberation of the Centauri mining complex, Rivera announced to the assembled staff. Estimated civilian casualties, 0. Enemy forces eliminated, 3,000 units. Admiral Chen smiled grimly. How many humans did we lose? 2 injured, none killed. The Vorthan assault teams suffered no casualties. The pattern was becoming familiar. Human-led operations consistently achieved objectives that should have been impossible, with minimal friendly casualties and maximum damage to hegemony forces. Other species throughout the galaxy were beginning to take notice. The Drakmari Confederacy has formally requested alliance terms, Ambassador Klein reported. They're offering their entire fleet in exchange for human tactical advisors. Tell them we'll consider it, Rivera said absently, already focused on the next operation. Princess, what's the status on the Vorthan industrial conversion? Veltar consulted har datapad. Father has authorized complete retooling of our military production. Human weapon designs are being integrated with Vorthan manufacturing capabilities. The first hybrid plasmakinetic rifles should be ready for field testing next week. It was remarkable how quickly the two military cultures had merged. Vorthan's strength and advanced technology, combined with human adaptability and tactical innovation, was creating a fighting force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. But, more importantly, genuine partnerships were forming between individual soldiers and officers. The real revelation had come during the liberation of the hegemony's first conquered world. Intelligence estimates suggested it would take a full fleet action to reclaim the planet. Instead, Rivera had requested a single battalion of mixed human and Vorthan troops. The mission lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the hegemony occupation force had been completely eliminated, and the surviving colonists were boarding rescue vessels. The enemy's adaptive algorithms, designed to counter any known military doctrine, simply could not process the combination of human unpredictability and Vorthan raw power. Incoming priority transmission, the communications officer announced. It's from Emperor Vexthal himself. The holographic image of the ancient ruler materialized in the center of the war room. Behind him, Veltar could see the Grand Council chambers of Vorthan Prime, filled with military advisors and noble houses. Daughter, Captain Rivera, the Emperor began formally. I address you both as representatives of our alliance. The hegemony has just transmitted a direct communication to the Imperial Palace. Rivera straightened slightly. What do they want, Your Majesty? They wish to negotiate. The Emperor's voice carried a mixture of disbelief and satisfaction. For the first time in recorded history, the hegemony is requesting terms for withdrawal from this galactic sector. Stunned silence filled the war room. The hegemony had never retreated, never negotiated, never showed any behavior except relentless expansion and consumption. Their machine intelligence was supposedly incapable of fear or doubt. Were their terms? Veltar asked. Complete withdrawal from all territory captured in the past 2 years, in exchange for guaranteed safe passage to the Outer Rim. They cite unacceptable tactical variables as justification for strategic repositioning. Admiral Chun laughed outright. They're running away. A machine intelligence that has conquered half the galaxy is running away from us. Rivera remained thoughtful. It makes sense from their perspective. Their entire strategic doctrine is based on predictable opponents. We've introduced too many variables for their algorithms to process effectively. More than that, Veltar added, understanding dawning in her golden eyes. We've shown that biological life can evolve faster than mechanical intelligence can adapt. They've realized that fighting us will only make us stronger. The Emperor nodded gravely. The question before us now is whether to accept their withdrawal or press our advantage. Rivera looked around the room at the mixed human and Vorthan staff, all of whom had become genuine colleagues over the past months. What does everyone think? The discussion that followed represented something unprecedented in galactic history. Two former enemy species, now bound by marriage alliance and shared purpose, debating as equals how to handle the surrender of their greatest threat. In the end, they accepted the hegemony's withdrawal, but demanded monitoring stations at the sector borders and a formal non-aggression treaty. The machines agreed without argument, apparently eager to remove themselves from contact with the unpredictable alliance. As the celebrations began throughout the fleet, Veltar found herself alone with Rivera on the observation deck. Through the transparent aluminum, they could see both human and Vorthan vessels working together with an efficiency that would have been impossible a year ago. "Do you think this marriage was worth it?" she asked quietly. Rivera smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious features. "Princess, I think we've accomplished something much more important than either of our governments intended." "What's that?" "We've proven that differences can become strengths if people are willing to learn from each other." Veltar nodded, watching their combined fleet prepare for the journey home. The political marriage had become something real, the alliance had become genuine friendship, and two species had learned that together they could face any threat the galaxy might offer. The hegemony's retreat would be remembered as the moment when biological life proved its superiority over mechanical existence. But for those who lived through it, the real victory was simpler: the discovery that former enemies could become family, and that sometimes the greatest strength came not from conquest, but from cooperation. The Galactic Council chambers hummed with tension as representatives from 12 different species gathered around the crystalline conference table. Ambassador Zexhai of the Vorthan Empire drummed his six-clawed fingers against the surface, his reptilian eyes fixed on the human delegation across from him. The war between humanity and the Vorthans had raged for 3 brutal years, consuming entire star systems and leaving billions dead on both sides. "This is madness," hissed General Croft, his battle-scarred carapace gleaming under the artificial lights. "We should crush these mammals beneath our claws, not negotiate with them." Zexhai raised a scaled hand for silence. The Vorthan Empire had ruled this sector of the galaxy for over 2 millennia, their superior technology and warrior culture making them nearly unstoppable. But humanity had proven surprisingly resilient, their adaptability and tactical innovation turning what should have been a quick conquest into a grinding stalemate. On the human side of the table, Admiral Sarah Chun maintained her composure despite the obvious hostility radiating from their former enemies. She had lost too many good people in this war, watched too many colonies burn under Vorthan plasma bombardments. But she also understood the bigger picture that few others could see. "The hegemony approaches from the outer rim," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the murmured conversations. "Our intelligence suggests they'll reach this sector within 2 standard years. Neither of our civilizations can face them alone." The mention of the hegemony sent a chill through the assembled delegates. The ancient machine intelligence had already consumed 3 entire galactic arms, converting all organic life into raw materials for their endless expansion. World after world fell silent as the geometric ships swept through star systems like a plague of metal locusts. "You propose an alliance," Zexhai said, his tone carefully neutral. "But trust between our peoples has been shattered. Too much blood has been spilled." Admiral Chen nodded slowly. "Which is why we propose something more binding than mere treaties. A marriage alliance, as our ancestors once practiced. A union that would create unbreakable bonds between our civilizations." The Vorthan delegation erupted in angry chittering and hissing. General Croft slammed his massive fist on the table, cracking the crystal surface. You insult us. No pure-blooded Vorthan would contaminate themselves with human genetics. Not just any marriage, Chen continued calmly. A marriage between champions. Your greatest warrior and ours. Zexai's eyes narrowed to golden slits. And who would represent humanity in such a union? Chen gestured to the figure seated beside her, a man who had remained silent throughout the proceedings. Captain Marcus Rivera looked unremarkable by human standards. Average height, brown hair, quiet demeanor. But those who knew his reputation understood that appearances could be devastatingly deceiving. Captain Rivera has agreed to represent humanity's interests, Chen announced. General Croft laughed, a sound like grinding metal. This soft creature? Our champion would tear him apart in seconds. Your champion being? Rivera asked quietly, speaking for the first time. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but something in his tone made several Vorthan warriors shift uncomfortably. Princess Veltar, Zexai replied with obvious pride. Daughter of Emperor Vexthal, conqueror of the Andorian Nebula, slayer of the great beast of Proxima. She has never known defeat in single combat. Rivera nadit sotfeli. I see. And this marriage would be contingent on a formal challenge. Of course, General Croft snarled. If you cannot defeat our princess in honorable combat, you are unworthy to share her bed or command our respect. The human captain smiled slightly, an expression that somehow made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. When do we begin? As the formal arrangements were discussed, none of the aliens present truly understood what they had just agreed to. They knew Marcus Rivera's military record, of course, impressive by human standards, decorated veteran of the Vorthan campaigns. But they had no idea about the classified missions, the impossible victories against overwhelming odds, or why his own species sometimes whispered his name with the same reverence reserved for legends. Princess Veltar herself remained on the Vorthan homeworld, preparing for what her advisors assured her would be a brief and decisive combat against an inferior opponent. She had fought the humans before, knew their limitations. They were clever, certainly, but physically weak and slow compared to Vorthan warriors. What neither side fully grasped was that this marriage proposal would either forge the greatest alliance in galactic history or spark a conflict that would make their previous war seem like a minor skirmish. The fate of two civilizations now rested on the outcome of a single combat between champions who had never met but whose destinies were now irrevocably intertwined.